Hey guys, welcome to CXO Conversations live at IFF 2026. My name is Matteo Rizzi. I'm your host today, since a couple of days already. And today I am with my new friend, Naveen Gupta, CEO of Crystal Intelligence. Naveen, welcome to the CXO podcast.
Matteo, first of all, big thank you very much for inviting me in this beautiful city of Kigali. Super excited to be here.
So, give us a little bit of background about you, a bit about Crystal Intelligence as well. Then, let's move on. We have plenty of ground to cover.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm, of course, now CEO of Crystal Intelligence. Prior, worked 7 years at Ripple in different markets around the world, but primarily in Africa and in the Middle East. And before that, I was building Uber for trucks in India. And before that, TradeFi experience in different markets around the world. But the most relevant would be that I was on the board of NPCI, which essentially created UPI. But I'm talking about 2010, when UPI wasn't as famous and as glamorous as what it is today.
You have an engineer background?
I don't, but I understand technology enough not to be dangerous and to be dangerous when it is required. And that's the reason when I joined Crystal Intelligence, I could see what's happening. So just a quick macro trend, and then I'll explain to you what Crystal Intelligence does.
Please.
So if you asked me 3 years ago, and you were generally talking about digital assets, I would say majority of the digital assets companies were in the unregulated or unlicensed space. And not because they didn't want to, just because in every single country, including the US, there was no licensing framework, right? But now, just 2 to 3 years forward, I would say majority of them are moving into a licensed framework. That means they're looking at getting regulated, or they're already regulated, and they have a license in one jurisdiction or in multiple jurisdictions. When that happens, then they have to look at investor protection, make sure Matteo's one Bitcoin is essentially safe, there is no hacking. They have to make sure they have insurance, they have to make sure that their tech and the compliance standards are up to par. So for example, you would not expect a licensed player, if you take a bank, and an equivalent would be a cryptocurrency exchange, to send funds to a sanctioned entity or a sanctioned address, people who are doing wrong things, say for example, North Korea. Now, by use of our technology, use of our platform, that's what a VASP is able to avoid. What it is able to do is when cryptocurrency address is being used to receive the funds, it's able to check it and ensure that that particular wallet doesn't belong to anybody who's sanctioned, or there is no other risk that is associated with it, right? So we do exactly the same thing, which essentially a bank will be obligated to do in a fiat world, but for the crypto industry. The second thing that we do is continually we work with law enforcement and regulators on the next step. Let's assume something wrong has happened, right? Where, as you would have heard about very large hacks, hundreds of millions of dollars have been stolen.
Or actually even worse.
Even worse so. So in that case, we provide the investigation capability to support law enforcement, right? Track, trace, make sure where the funds have gone, ability working with them to freeze the funds wherever possible, and then of course let the court takes its own course to essentially bring those funds back and redistribute it back to the victims who have originally lost their money, right? So in both these things, we are essentially working on one side with the regulators and the law enforcement, and on the other side with a lot of VASPs to make sure that prevention is better than a cure.
It's incredible how the escalation of the blockchain capabilities, the crypto exchanges, and recently, literally in the past maybe 24 months, there is hardly any conference where the word stablecoin is not associated with the debate. Enlighten us a little bit more in how the ecosystem has evolved, take into the account that our audience is not all fintechs, right? So, be a little bit pedagogical as, you see these realities every day.
True. 100%. And we are in Africa, so I'll take some African example. But again, first, just a quick 10,000 feet view. Let's divide the whole digital asset market into two parts. So one is the speculative part, right? And it could be any
I
of the...
buy Bitcoin and I pray.
Absolutely. And then you want your money to essentially become more than what you originally started with, right? And people are essentially looking for return. But the second part is the non-speculative part, that means stablecoin, right? Which essentially is pegged to the US dollar, so there is no increase or decrease in value to that stablecoin. And there are multiple use cases. So let's take an example, and this is a real example. A friend of mine runs a bird safari in Africa. It's one of the largest ones, right? So today, one of his biggest problems is, let's assume Matteo from Europe wants to go and book a safari. By the time you send your wire transfer, it takes between It could be 5 days or it could be 15 days for the bank to clear that Eurowire transfer into their account for which you are able to book a safari. But we know, let's assume there was a place in the safari which starts 2 days later in Namibia, you should be able to take that, right? So now they want to encourage or give the choice to Matteo to say, hey, instead, just pay us in a stable coin. We'll receive it instantly. We'll confirm the safari to you. And day after tomorrow, you can essentially be on that safari. Yeah. So you're collapsing the time that earlier it would take them to essentially book and offer that services to their customers, right? So you're increasing the velocity of money, but you're having a direct impact into the business of this particular company, which is essentially selling globally, right? The other use case, for example, would be remittance, right? Where essentially money is moving from point A to point B. We know Africa, on a percentage basis, pays the highest amount, right? In sub-Saharan Africa, it's 8+%. In more, let's say, modernized part of Africa, it's still 6%. That means, let's assume, if it's $100 billion worth of remittance that's going out, $6 billion is being eaten up in fees and FX spread. That's a lot. $6 billion for Africa, you can essentially do a lot, right? The third thing, which is not many times spoken about on the stablecoin side, is there is large number of people who are trying to preserve their capital from eroding, which means they're worried about high inflation, which means the currency is depreciating. So earlier, they would keep money in US dollar under the mattress, or in some cases where the banking service was available, then they would keep the US dollar with the bank, right? But we have seen in some cases, for example, if it's Lebanon, of course, it has not happened in Africa, but in Lebanon, where banks were not able to give back the US dollar deposits that essentially these individuals had in the banking system itself. So they have shifted to stable coins and essentially saying, hey, if we want to protect ourselves against depreciating currency, I have two choices, stable coins or gold, right? And gold, a lot of time, because of the physical nature of it, with younger population, they like stable coin. And what we are seeing is younger people who are 19-year-old are teaching their parents to say, hey, don't stuff money in the mattress. It's unsafe. Here's a cool way, a clever way of holding the same exposure, but you do that in the stable coin. So actually, very large number of people are trying to protect them from depreciating assets. So one, I would say, just to summarize, new business models, right? Like to increase the customers that you essentially sell to. The second, remittances, and the third is preservation of your capital not eroding because of depreciation of the local currency.
Naveen, how does regulation sort of comes to play? And to our audience, let's use a concrete example. So I can't send any amount of money to anywhere, in Africa, for example. Simply because there are different restrictions, different type of KYC. So how easier is, or how more challenging is to harmonize this sort of practices and regulation across the continent? Otherwise, the technology is there, but then, the actual business can't practice, right?
Yes. Yeah, so I think the way I think about it would be, and I want to be very practical in this discussion, right? Harmonizing 52 people in the room is impossible, right? Let's just start there, right? And what is the trigger for change? Why should the 52 people essentially agree on a common cause when they have their own vested interest? So the way I like to start, and particularly because I was building Uber for trucks in India, in a platform business, first you just have to get the two people right. One driver, one buyer. And in this case, two countries. Let's assume it could be, hypothetically, Kenya and Rwanda. It could be Uganda and Rwanda. It could be country
like
and country.
Like the fintech passport in license between Ghana and Rwanda.
Exactly.
That is already working.
Absolutely. It's two like-minded countries who essentially say, hey, you know what? We will sacrifice our own individual gain for a broader gain, right? Two of us will get together and we'll harmonize among ourselves. Let's assume within the border, there is a tomato seller who essentially just drives 1 kilometer on the other side, sells the goods. He should get paid instantly, right? Yeah. Because there's already 24/7, like for example, in Rwanda, there is Momo Pay, there is equivalent in another country. These two are done, but on the cross-border, why should it take 3 days? And a lot of time, we don't need to go through a third currency. We could figure out a mechanism just between us, how to do it cheaply and how to do it better, right? Yeah. And that's agreed. Now, the third chap looks at it and say, hey, these two guys are enjoying great growth, right? Because their economy is improving, more entrepreneurs are essentially coming because now they have seen the benefits of the third guy joins, fourth guy joins, fifth guy joins, right? So to me, that's a practical way to start. And then at some point, you'll get 52, or maybe you don't get 52, but you don't care because then you have got a critical mass, it proves. And these two have essentially been the pilots, or these two have essentially proven to the rest of the 50 that this works, and come and join the gang.
Incredible. Okay, it's not incredible. It's actually very sense making. And truth is that basically leading by example, right? You get two counterparties that are working, and then people are inviting because by definition the infrastructure is open, right?
100%.
Absolutely. So I have a question that I didn't plan to ask, but when we prepare it, it triggers something, and it's actually something lighter and also a bit juicier to maybe talk about. So I think I know, and I will not be explicit about it, one occasion where something really bad happened, let's say in one of the African countries. Actually, no, it was a European country. Basically, someone was abducted, okay? And the ransom was asked in actual stablecoin. True. And I actually didn't know. You might have been involved or not. I don't know. But then all of a sudden, it was a very clever, fast, deep tech orchestration of players. And actually, the case was solved and the money was retrieved. I don't know if you know the actual fact I'm talking about.
Yeah.
We don't need to reveal it here.
True.
But that actually triggers the question, which is how law enforcement today are actually even keeping up?
Yeah.
And how do you work together with them?
True. So first, I want to just answer the second part first, and then I'll come to specific cases, right? So what law enforcement today needs, particularly in Africa, now that we are sitting here, it needs huge amount of capacity building, right? Because this is a tech, you can call it, led forensic, right? As you know, most of the way law enforcement is based is that after 3 years, the officers get promoted and then it'll go to a different zone. But you can't let it happen in our kind of industry.
Yep.
So the government itself is adjusting to say, hey, around cyber threats and on digital asset threats, how do we essentially create a niche team, right? So all of them have essentially generally created a cybersecurity unit, which takes care of digital asset forensics as well. So in a positive way, we are working with a number of law enforcement and regulators here in Africa for capacity building, offering our deep expertise, a lot of time pro bono, to make sure that they're able to come up the curve, right? So that's one. The second, I want to divide into two parts. So one is high-profile cases, the one that you essentially talked about, right? And the reason a lot of action in these high-profile cases get taken because they are high-profile, right? I mean, they are, let's say, the government needs to be involved because of the reputational risk that essentially comes with it, right? And then companies like us very, very quickly mobilize, along with a lot of our partners, which include exchanges, which include many other tech companies, where we are able to fight against like the incident that essentially happened and do the response time. So for example, one of the things that we have in our company is war rooms, right?
Yeah.
And then we are able to quickly assimilate and then work with it, right? But the second point that is essentially today impacting very large number of people is one, love scams and investment scams, right? If you just Google, and I don't know if you have experienced that, Matteo, but I have experienced that, and I think there is probably no one in your audience. You will get a hi on WhatsApp.
Yeah.
You're on your LinkedIn to essentially say, I'm this, and of course there'll be either an attractive guy or an attractive lady, and essentially saying, I want to have a conversation with you. And normally where that conversation eventually ends is, hey, I have a great investment opportunity where you can double your money, and it is in crypto and everything else. In 99.9% of the cases, these are scams, right? And eventually these are thousands and thousands of cases, right, being run at industrial scale in a lot of overseas locations, through which huge number of people are essentially getting impacted. And you know, the sad part of that is, because it's a love scam, a lot of people are ashamed to tell their families. They're ashamed to go and report that to the police. And this is almost like a big epidemic that's essentially, I mean, going all over the world.
Is that a huge amount, a huge volume?
Very, very huge amount. I would say tens of billions of dollars, if not more.
Okay.
And of course, the proceeds of this money is being used to fund all kind of nefarious activities that essentially goes with it, right? And that's one, we started a pro bono platform called a Scam Alert. Right? In Scam Alert, it's very, very simple. A victim who has been scammed essentially puts in their details to essentially say, I've been scammed, and this is the scammer's wallet address, right? And what we do is we propagate it free of charge all across to every VASP. That means, let's assume Matteo is trying to send funds to the same wallet. He's forewarned that Naveen, as a first victim, has already found this to be a scam, right? So we can't say
And
the
the
first victim
identifier is what exactly? Is the wallet that this guy
is the wallet,
proposing?
absolutely.
Okay.
The wallet in which scammer is essentially receiving the funds, right?
Okay.
So then we are able to forewarn you to essentially say, this has already been reported as
This
scam.
wallet is red flag.
Absolutely. It's red flag, right? And then we are going free of charge to law enforcement around the world, to victims around the world to essentially say, hey, it's hard for us to stop the first victim, but second, third, 100, 500, absolutely, right? And again, I mean, this is a non-commercial proposition from us for the benefit of our ecosystem. And these are a number of practical steps that we have essentially taken to say, hey, how do we fight against that? Because in some way, crowdsourcing intelligence is also a great way for us to fight against these scams. And these are happening at a very large scale.
Because it almost looks like part of it is actually almost an industry utility, that should be built. Maybe part of, pro bono from a number of players. What is it today? Like a space, or does it exist, or will it be built, or are you guys involved in building it? Because I suppose that we should get maybe the 20, crystal intelligence around the world, and has, that collaborative part for the greater good of industry. Is some initiative like this going on already?
Yeah. So firstly, I want to say
Curiosity,
we are very open. We have raised our hand first and essentially say, hey, we are ready to share our data. Like this scam alert that we built pro bono, it's available to anybody. You can essentially hook into it and then essentially get the data, irrespective of the victim may come from Korea, and the same scammer is trying to scam somebody in El Salvador or in Nigeria, for example, right? So that's one. I would say still more work needs to be done getting the industry together, and that's the reason forums like these are brilliant, because they bring various industry players together in the room with the regulators. Like, for example, yesterday, I co-chaired a roundtable where multiple central bank governors were there. Also, multiple exchanges were there, stablecoin issuers were there, banks were there, banking association were there, and we were able to come together in a single room and essentially say, what are the top 3 challenges and how do we solve for that, right? Because I'll be very honest with you, sometimes for data sharing, you do need some kind of a regulatory approval, right? Like to essentially say, hey, A's data gets shared with B, even though it's a bad people's data, right? So if, for example, that kind of forum or that kind of, let's say, meeting of minds can happen under the purview of a regulator or even G20 countries, I think that will be brilliant. From our side, we are open and we can lead this effort along with any progressive regulator who wants to get this done.
So Crystal is European-based in Amsterdam, you told me. How, I'm curious in being European myself, how sort of, is that easier to have this type of conversation? Has the European Union already, find a way to make these conversations smoother?
Yeah. So 100%. So these kind of conversations are on the top of the agenda. And I'll give you a few examples, right? Specific disinformation campaigns are being run around the world, right? It could be for multiple motives. Sometimes the motive is political, to influence elections, right? And of course, we all live in democratic worlds. You don't want your elections to be influenced. And sometimes it's because of defense reason, right? Spreading rumors and other things, right? Because we are all in state of conflict for different reasons around the world. So there is a huge amount of misinformation. And what we find for a lot of time for this misinformation, the payment is into crypto, right? Because you're essentially paying those people, and it could be influencers, it could be multiple other, let's say, illegit sources. They're getting paid in crypto to essentially do the wrong work. And then this becomes very important. And that's what we have been working with a number of law enforcement agencies around the world to track and trace and then find where this funds are originating from and how to make sure that this essentially is on their radar. So this conversation is becoming more and more active because there is one side on the cyber warfare or cybersecurity side, but the underlying part is the crypto. Like the example that you essentially say, there may be an abduction that may happen, but then the ransomware essentially gets paid in crypto. And like we all know, follow the money. If you follow the money, you are able to reach who the culprit is.
Actually, and sort of as wrapping up this conversation, Naveen and I had an idea just outside this podcast. Because we were talking about capacity building on one side, and on the other side, on the fact that there are like immense talent in Africa. Actually, the best hackers here, they actually doing bad things, and how can we maybe sort of divert these capabilities and build something like every year find the best 100 hackers in the continent and use partners like you that are thirsty, for this type of capabilities to deploy. I like the fact that we talked about it, and this is a real need, right? So capacity building is something that you do.
True.
So you're very close, I suppose, with you. So that's something that university can't teach. And I was curious to see which type of profiles, do you see in terms. The best hackers are probably already good at 16. Is that your experience as well? I'm curious. Share some.
So firstly, I would say there is absolutely no barrier to talent in the digital asset space, right? Anybody who's smart in Nigeria is equivalent to a smart person in Korea or in India or in America, right?
Very important to say this one.
It's very, very important, right? Because sometimes the first thing this particular hacker in a country in Africa has to have the belief to say, I'm second to none. I can compete against the best, I can win against the best, and I can do the best. So I don't have to go towards the wrong side, because if I'm the best, then the top people will recognize me, and I can build my company in Africa itself, or of course, and make the products available to anybody in the world, right? So for example, we are a remote first company. We will hire best talent anywhere in the world. So if we get the best talent, like for example, in this 100 hackers, we'll happy to offer internship, jobs, role, and essentially give them exactly what we'll essentially give to anybody else in terms of remuneration anywhere in the world, right? So I think that's very important. The second thing that I would say is there are two things. So one is persistence, and the second thing is talent, right? So if you take it from an IQ level and you were to test, say, for example, 15-year-old, and then give them any kind of a IQ test, there will be tens of thousands of people without any, you call it geographical significance, that will here be in Africa. But the second part is persistence, right? For them to be able to apply, and that's what we look for. We say, hey, you have got the talent, and so do many, many people, but are you able to sit and apply yourself for 12 hours? Because it's a painstaking work. I just want to be very honest, right? Yes, it may be glamorized, it may be called sexy, but initially you have to make sure you have the persistence to see through that particular problem, because the world is not built on easy problems. They've been sorted. Now it's built on more mathematical challenging problem, because that's what fundamental cryptography is. Cryptography is just a math puzzle, and you have to be smartest and persistent at being able to solve it. And sometimes it gets solved in one day. Sometimes it takes a long time to solve. But we will love to partner with somebody like yourself to essentially make this happen.
How many times have you been asked, how quantum will change, the security, around the crypto exchanges?
Yeah.
How many times have you asked in different conferences?
So I've been asked many, many times, and I would still say the awareness of the changes that the quantum will bring is less, right? Most of the companies are still not very aware of the things that is going to bring, right? Because it's something that's going to happen in the future, and hence lots of time people don't recognize that, right? And my view is initially when quantum will come, or let's say it will start to crack private wallets, right? So Matteo has a wallet, right? And there is, based on your profile, let's assume there were total number of X number of permutation combination possible for your password. And because the person knows your profile, they're able to narrow down and then to be able to then use brute force to be able to crack that, right? And then it'll, of course, move towards to more complex things, right? And we need both at the individual and institutional level a lot more awareness to say, hey, how do we become quantum resistant so that even before this change happens, we are able to change the security apparatus and infrastructure in our company.
I'm really happy that we touched, at the end of the conversation, the capacity building topic, because that is something that is super relevant here, especially at IFF. And I really hope that next time we will invite Naveen to a conversation, we can actually, tell a couple of nice stories of young talents that they got a great career. Naveen, thank you so much for being with us.
Matteo, loved being here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Guys, that is a CXO conversation at IFF 2026, and this is a wrap.